Hey guys, it's Tim Chermak here with a special edition of the Platform Marketing Show. This is actually going to be a live recording of my keynote presentation from the most recent Platform Marketing Mastermind. Enjoy.
There's more people at this resort right now than live in War Road, Minnesota. War Road, Minnesota has fewer than 2,000 people, and yet an American men's hockey team has never won a gold medal without a member of War Road on the roster. I don't know if you caught in the video, but they said they've had, in a town less than 2,000 people, 80 D1 hockey players, 5 NHL players, including for any current fans, TJ Oshie is probably the most recent member that you might know, who single-handedly beat the Russians in the shootout back in 2014. He was from War Road. No hockey team has ever won a gold medal from the U.S. without a member of War Road on the roster. That doesn't make any sense, right? That's wild. Whenever something doesn't make sense, culture is probably the explanation. I asked a buddy of mine who works in the corporate analytics department at Bank of America. I asked him to crunch this for me because this math is way beyond my capabilities. I said, what are the odds of that? If you divide the population of War Road relative to the population of the United States, what are the odds that that's true, that no one's ever gold medaled without a member of War Road on the roster? Because it's the whole science of probability and statistics is only relevant, right, when all things are equal. But culture is what makes all things not equal, right? So he runs the numbers and he's like, it's 0.0000. I was like, okay, what does that mean? He's like, it's about a 1 in 25 million chance that that's true. In the Miracle on Ice, for those of you who remember back in 1980 when we upset the Soviets, there was a member of War Road on that roster. Had modern sports betting been around at the time, the sports books would have had that game at 1,000 to 1 odds. 1,000 to 1 is nothing compared to 1 in 25 million, right? When something doesn't make sense, culture is probably the explanation. In fact, I think sometimes, to someone who's never experienced it, a miracle is just what happens when you have culture. This is a graph. It's probably my all-time favorite graph. It's probably the most important graph you will ever see. It's history of world GDP. For not just decades, actually, for centuries, most economists looked at this, and the standard explanation that most of you probably grew up learning in school of why did at the very end of that, no pun intended, it forms kind of a hockey stick curve there at the end. What happened around 1800? If you see this graph, it's a pretty flat line. I'm going to walk over here and hopefully I don't get feedback, so fingers crossed. Life for someone around the birth of Christ to the year 500, this is the Dark Ages here after the fall of the Roman Empire between 500 and 1,000. It's kind of funny when you look at this because that looks like a lot of Dark Ages to me. I think they got a bad rap in between 500 and 2,000 because things sucked between 1,000 and 1,500 too. No economic growth whatsoever for thousands of years. So what this literally means is someone in the year 1 had the same standard of living as someone in the year 1400. No economic growth for thousands of years. And then all of a sudden, it just explodes right here. It's a War Road effect, right? What happened there? Because you can't explain that with math. The standard explanation for centuries when economists study this is this explosion, really, the one word they'll use is capitalism, right? Capitalism happened in the West, and that's why the world economy exploded. Because as recently as 1800, even in America, so I'm not talking Africa, even in the United States of America, as recently as the year 1800, people lived on $5 a day. That's inflation adjusted, so our equivalent of $5 a day. I couldn't live on breakfast at $5. And they lived on shelter, food, transportation, clothing. The average human in the United States was doing about $5 a day, inflation-adjusted dollars in 1800. So the standard explanation is capitalism. We had the rule of law, we had private property, we had capital markets, or we had natural resources. The U.S. had a lot of timber and access to waterways. These are all these kind of naturalistic explanations of why that happened, and specifically why it happened in America, right? Why did this explosion in our standard of living happen here? But recently, economists have started to question that because there's this big gaping hole in this theory of capitalism. If your answer is just capitalism, well, how do you explain ancient China? Because they had the rule of law, they had private property rights, they had capitalists and engineers and innovation and scientists. Why didn't it happen then 1,000 years ago? So there's an economic historian that I love all of her books. Super nerdy, really dense. I would not recommend anyone read them. But her name is Deirdre McCloskey. I met her actually at a conference a couple years ago. And she brought forth this thesis that's starting to become more popular in the economics profession, that the answer is, drum roll please, culture. Why this happened in America and not anywhere else, and why it happened when it did compared to before, was America was the first culture in world history to combine all those things. Yes, we had natural resources. Yes, we had private property and the rule of law and free markets and all that, but we combined that for the first time with a culture that valued business, right? We talked about business differently in America. If you were an ambitious person, you sailed across an ocean to get here because you'd be surrounded by other ambitious people. It was really the first time that a nation or a culture sprang up where it was cool to be an entrepreneur. Even in Europe at the time, if you were a very wealthy merchant or entrepreneur, you were a second-class citizen compared to the nobles of the time. If you weren't born into the right noble family, it didn't matter if you were a really successful, business owner, you weren't the elite, right? In America, the elite were the successful people. So if you were a hardworking, ambitious person, wouldn't you want to go where hard work and ambition is, well, frankly, cool, right? America was the first ever time in world history that final ingredient was added to the recipe. And that's what happened. So even with all the math that economists love to use and the formulas, and you have to have like a finance degree and know advanced calculus to do these, econometrics, like my friend who works at Bank of America, like the explanation for all this GDP growth really comes down to culture. And what is culture, right? Well, culture are just the shared values of a community. And it's kind of hidden right in the word itself. Like the secret to business success is hidden right in the word. So the Latin prefix com means together. So community, right? Com, the word com, community. The word companion, we just combine the Latin panis, which means bread, which is where we get a Panera bread. That's where they got their name. Panis means bread. It's literally those you share bread with. That's a companion. A company is actually just those you eat with. So historically, a company meant a much tighter group of people because you actually would break bread together, share meals. It didn't necessarily mean people you worked with. It's kind of evolved into meaning that. Combine, a combination of things, or if you live in the Midwest, we'd probably pronounce that combine. Commune, right? What's one other word that starts with com? This to me is so interesting. Communist, close, commune. See where you're going there? This to me is so cool. It's hidden right there in the word. The success to business, if you want to stand out and create a category of one, it's hidden right there in the word commerce. It's people doing business together. That's what this room is, right? That's what makes the Platfam different from other marketing conferences or real estate conferences you might go to. There's this sense of community, of commerce. It's intangible, and yet it's so tangible. You know what I'm saying? If I go back to that slide and show the GDP growth, the answer is culture. It's an intangible, and yet that graph is pretty damn tangible, right? The results are pretty tangible. I think the secret to deeper business success, bigger business success, and also just having more fun in business is when you combine community with capitalism. This is a picture of the Puritan Cafe in the 1950s in Wilmer, Minnesota. It's a town I'm from, small town in central Minnesota. It has about 20,000 people. It's 2 hours to the nearest airport. There is nothing around it and nothing to do. And yet, two of the largest poultry companies in the world both came from this small town in Minnesota. If you eat a turkey on Thanksgiving, there's a greater than 50% chance it came from one of the men in this picture in the 1950s. My grandpa, where's my mom? Is my mom in here? My mom and my Aunt Ruth Ann are back there. Both of them are daughters of this guy. That's my Grandpa Ted. I'm named after him. My middle name is Ted. They got together regularly every week at the Puritan Cafe, and all the local businessmen just grab lunch together. It wasn't formal. It's not like some super high-end business club. You can see there's like folding chairs they're sitting at, right? It was really cheap. And yet they worked together and built this massive industry from this small town. Everything from raising turkeys to processing turkeys to vaccines to robotics with turkeys, owning farms. I mean, these guys are on 6 continents because there's no turkeys on Antarctica. Earl B. Olson is in this next picture. This is a picture of my grandpa, is the guy on the left there, and Earl B. Olson is on the right. He started, if you guys heard of Jennie-O turkeys, it's a brand that's for sale in most Walmarts and everywhere across the country. Started in my hometown. They do, I think, $400 million a year in revenue now. It's worth billions of dollars. Recently got acquired by Hormel. Hormel's worth $12 billion. All from this small town in Minnesota. And they just regularly had lunch together, and they built $1 billion industry. The odds of that happening in a small town that has no geographic advantages for poultry over anywhere else in the U.S., when something doesn't make sense, the explanation is probably culture. The world today, more than any time in history, I feel like, is pressuring us all to be on our phones, going to Zoom events, attending webinars, listening to podcasts of people we're not in the room with, right? But I think the real action is in real life. Like, at every step of the way, even the churches we go to, they're encouraging, oh, watch us online, catch us on Sunday mornings, don't leave your couch, right? But I feel like we're missing something if we think that's the same, right? There's a reason that at this mastermind, we don't record the sessions or stream them. Because people always ask us, oh, I won't be able to make it this year. Can I catch it online? Nope. In fact, hell no. I don't want to create any sort of incentive for you to think that it's the same thing or even close to the same thing, to be sitting at home on your butt watching these sessions as if that's the point. It's not the information. It's the people that you meet here. Like, I'm under no delusion that the reason someone stays with Platform for 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years is because the ads are so genius or the results are so amazing. That's part of it, but it's the relationships, right? For many of you, your membership and Platform functions as a mastermind group that also happens to run your ads. I'm very consciously aware of that, right? I teach this to a lot of marketing conferences that I will speak at. Now they'll ask me, what's your secret? How have you built this successful company? It's like, well, we've kind of it wasn't by design, but we've like accidentally cultivated this community that functions as a mastermind group that just happens to manage the ads for our clients, right? That's what's really going on here. Now I want to apologize ahead of time because I'm going to dig into some Bible verses here. It might make some of you uncomfortable, but I do promise at different points of this presentation, I will offend everyone in the room, not just some of you. So if you haven't yet gotten offended, we are going to talk politics and religion and commerce. I will get to you later. So, open your Bibles to Luke chapter 10. We'll start with verse 25. This is the parable of the Good Samaritan. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? By the way, show of hands, who's heard this before? Okay, good. What must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He replied, how do you read it? Now, the law is just like the Old Testament, right? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is all stuff we've heard before. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied, do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself, which is basically the Bible saying this guy was trying to like show off to the room. So he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? And this is the part of the story that most of us, if you go to church, have not heard, because typically when the parable of the Good Samaritan is preached, it's talking about, hey, people are your neighbor. It's the least suspecting people that you should help. That's the angle that most pastors will take when they preach this. But the actual sociological, historical meaning is of this passage, of this parable, is very different from that. the key sentence, the key verse in this entire chapter, is actually verse 29 here. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" The word neighbor. In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead like a Vikings quarterback. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man pass by the other side, so too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him pass by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was when he saw him and took pity on him." Now, I'm not going to read the whole rest of it, but what happens is a priest goes by, a Levite goes by, and if you're not familiar with the Bible, the priests and the Levites, just think of them as like the super duper Christians, the people who should be helping people, but they don't. Now, this parable is structured in a very specific way. Just like in modern times, we have kind of the joke, like an Irishman, a Brit, and a Frenchman walk into a bar. It's always three people, right? Same thing in this story. The punchline is that the third person is always the wild card variable of the story, as it is in this story. It turns out it's the Samaritan that actually helps this guy who is robbed, beaten, left for dead on the side of the road. Now, they hated Samaritans back then. Samaritans were like ethnically used to be Israelites. That's the reason they hated them. But they had intermixed and married with different cultures and religions. And so like the hardline Jews of the time hated Samaritans. A perfect modern analogy is Jews and Palestinians. So you could just substitute the word Palestinian there. It was a Palestinian who came and rescued this Jewish man who was beaten and left for dead on the side of the road. He takes him to an inn, pays for the room, says, "I'll come back and check on him later to make sure he's okay. And then if there's extra money I owe you, I'll pay you later. Keep him here as long as he needs." And that's all great, and that's motivational. And most of us read that story, or we've heard that story preached on, and we think, oh, that's great. I should help everyone. That's the moral of the story. And it's not that that's incorrect, but it's incomplete. The real phrase there was the question, "Who is my neighbor?" In the law, so like the Old Testament, which was written in Hebrew, not Greek, it's the Hebrew word is rhea for neighbor. The word rhea was really connotated with like a member of your group, like basically an Israelite or a Jew, right? It had nothing to do with geographic proximity. It was, are they in your club? Are they a member of your tribe? That's what neighbor meant, right? But in the New Testament, which was written in Greek, the word used for neighbor, it's a very specific Greek word, plesion. And plesion, that neighbor, meant something very different. And that's why this story would have been so interesting to someone reading Luke's account. And Luke was, by the way, the most detailed of all the gospel writers. He was very educated compared to the other authors of the Gospels. So his account of events is just known to be much more detailed than Matthew, Mark, and John. It's why in church, usually if you read like the Christmas story, you're reading Luke chapter 2, right? Because it's a far more detailed historical account of the Christmas story than you get in the other Gospels. So Luke knows what he's doing when he intentionally chooses the Greek word plesion, because plesion in Greek meant your physical, proximate neighbor, someone who's just physically near to you, right? That completely changes how you read this story, because for millennia, they were taught that, hey, I'm nice to people in my group and I'm mean to people who are not in my group. Jesus in the story is like introducing a new way of thinking about morality, like an ethics system that's based on physical proximity. Physical proximity, like living where you are and caring about the people where you are, right? The idea that you would give money to some international, here's the part where I'll start offending people. The idea that you would give money to some international organization, I'll just use a stereotypical example, to dig wells in Africa while you ignore opportunities immediately around you would be a textbook violation of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Jesus is kind of laying out, hey, this is how I want you to focus. Don't worry about caring about people thousands of miles away or 500 miles away. You should not feel more attachment to someone in your tribe if they're halfway across the world than someone in your physical neighborhood. I don't have to connect the dots here between how this is relevant to the platform strategy. You can probably connect those dots. Now, I promised I'd offend everyone. I want to be an equal opportunity offender, so let's hit this next video, and I'll try to check some more boxes there.
Nothing makes fucking sense. Life makes no sense. You're on a planet right now. You think you're in America? Zoom out. You're on a space rock floating in nothingness, infinite nothingness, and the infinite nothingness is expanding. That means endlessness is getting bigger. That makes no fucking sense. We all just act like it's normal. Like, oh, everything's made of molecules. Okay. Got it. I'll never think about that again. I'm made of molecules, you're made of molecules, the air between us, it's all made of molecules. That makes no fucking sense. These molecules know they're molecules. These molecules are like, oh, I'm Pete. That doesn't make any sense. This stool is made of molecules, the same molecules in my hand. In fact, some of the molecules in this stool went into me while I've been talking, and some that were me have gone into this stool. And you know, when I knock these molecules into these molecules, when we ask science, why don't they go through each other? You know what the answer is? We don't know. That doesn't make any fucking sense.
Now, we got a noise, we've got several noise complaints so far, so I'm trying to set a new record at the Naples Grand for a noise complaint. So, if you haven't been offended yet, again, I will get to you. Why I think the parable of the Good Samaritan is fascinating, and why I think the Miracle on Ice, or the existence of War Road, Minnesota, is fascinating, or this chart of world GDP growth where it goes from 0 to a bajillion instantly. Why I think this is interesting is no one ever gets the explanation right? We're searching for mathematical linear relationships when the actual explanation is culture. If you've ever asked someone, what were the good old days in America? Almost invariably, people will answer like the 1950s and 1960s. Most people will say, oh, the 40s, 50s, 60s. Those were the good old days in the United States. And then people will search for these like quantifiable, empirical explanations of, okay, well, what was the unemployment rate in the 50s or 60s? Or what was GDP growth? Or, and sometimes the answer is intangible. It can't be quantified with economic metrics. Now, I'm going to ask you to pull out your phones quick because I'm going to fly through some really scary stats. You might want to take pictures of them. Here's the bad news, and it might, if we're lucky, set up some good news at the end. What the next section of this presentation is going to give you is an actual empirical explanation of why things in our country right now seem off. From 1965 to 1995, the average American gained 6 hours a week of leisure time. That's 300 hours per year. 6 hours a week of leisure time. Almost all of that has been spent on watching more TV. Also, Emily and Jackie, can you bring me the printouts? Just bring me one copy. So in that 30-year span, we gained a ton of leisure time. All of it was funneled into watching TV. 74% of all restaurant orders are now off-premises customers. This is according to the National Restaurant Association, which is to say takeout and delivery. 74%. That means a pretty small minority of people going and ordering food at a restaurant are actually eating there with other people in person, companion, right? Someone you eat bread with. There's not a lot of companions in culture anymore because we're eating alone. Thank you. On that note, according to OpenTable, people going out to eat alone has increased by 30% in just the past 2 years. Going out to eat alone. Now, I'm as introverted as anyone. My idea of a good time at the Platform Mastermind is hiding in a bathroom stall and hoping no one finds me. But going out to eat, that's not even a joke, I do that. Like, it's always like a big plus when the handicap stall is available because there's extra space in there. Like, you're not supposed to say that out loud, but everyone knows it's true. 30% in just the past 2 years, people going out to eat alone. Going out for dinner just with your friends, like, hey, grabbing some people and let's go grab beer and pizza, has decreased 30% in the last 20 years, according to the National Restaurant Association. For those of you who are older, do you remember a time when more people like hung out? Right? So when we say that the good old days are behind us, it's not always an economic explanation of what the unemployment rate was, what union memberships were or weren't, what the unemployment rate was. Sometimes there's intangible qualitative reasons that we feel a certain way that only in hindsight will we be able to assign statistics to describe those intangible feelings. In the 1930s, the average American went to the movies twice per month. Twice per month. Now, why? Ask yourself why. Because in the 1930s, that was the smack dab middle of the Great Depression. And yet they were still making time to go to the movies twice per month because it was a social activity. You would go with your friends, right? Today, it's just 3 times per year someone might go to the movies. So twice per month is 25 times a year, right? 25 down to 3 times a year. This is what's really, really interesting. Today, we watch 19 hours of TV every week, which is the equivalent of watching 9 movies a week. So it's not that watching movies has declined. It's that watching movies in a social atmosphere with other people has declined. We've massively increased the amount of movies we're watching, but we're watching them alone. That's the common trend throughout all this, is we're watching, we're living, we're worshiping, we're dining, we're working alone. By 2022, adults spent an extra 99 minutes per day at home compared to 2002. And if you think that's because of COVID, I'll get to that. We eat, work, relax, shop, and dine. Worship at home. Remote work has become remote life. All these stats are courtesy of Patrick Sharkey from Princeton University. In the previous 50 years, this has all happened while the size of the average new single-family home increased by 50%, while the size of the average family decreased. So we've gone from an era where the average house, if you looked at the average family, every person had about 200 to 250 square feet per person. If you look at the average size of the average home versus the average family size. Now, many houses have up to 1,000 square feet per person. We're building houses, it's the architecture of loneliness. We're building houses to be so big that ideally you never have to see people, right? Why would you ever want to leave your house if you effectively, if every man, woman, and child in the house has now somewhere between typically 700 and 1,000 square feet to themselves? Of course we're hanging out with other people less. Of course we're going out to eat less. Of course we're doing things like going to church less, or we're not in the Knights of Columbus or Kiwanis or Rotary Club or the Chamber of Commerce or neighborhood, clubs, PTA, traveling sports leagues, book clubs, bowling leagues, golf leagues, when our houses are so big and we can watch all the entertainment at home. It's both cause and effect. Like, you see what I'm saying? In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General at the time, Vivek Murthy, wrote an 80-page warning about an epidemic of loneliness. So even in the highest levels of science and government, they're tracking this and they're very, very alarmed. This is a stat that's wild to me. Being lonely, and they controlled for every variable: age, race, religion, income, education levels. When you control for all possible variables, being lonely, which is defined as not seeing friends or family on a regular basis, at least several times a week in person, right? Phone calls and Zooms don't count. In person. Being lonely is statistically as likely to cause you to die early as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So we did a national war on, smoking and drugs, and it turns out the way we're currently living is actually far more dangerous to our health than Oreos or cigarettes. We're not saying 1 or 2 cigarettes a day, 15 cigarettes a day. Americans spent more time alone, this is according to the Philadelphia Fed, last year than they did in 2021. So it's not COVID. It's getting worse. We spent more time alone than when we were legally locked inside our homes. It's almost like if George Orwell and Aldous Huxley, from Brave New World in 1984, if you were to ask yourself the question, who was right? Was Orwell right that the decline of society would come from a totalitarian top-down government telling people how to live? Or was Huxley right that the decline of society would not be a murder but a suicide, that we would pleasure ourselves to death of our own volition? It turns out Huxley was right. In the 1980s and 1990s, involvement in local community organizations fell by more than half. Local community organizations, again, Knights of Columbus, if you've ever attended like a Saturday morning pancake feed for your local fire department, like any of those things that you might do with other people in person, as radical as that sounds, that's what people did in the good old days, right? Almost makes you start to question, maybe that's why they were the good old days. The average person today, for those of you who have kids, you'll enjoy these next couple slides, is awake for about 900 minutes per day. For teenagers, over a third of that time is spent looking at screens. Over 300 minutes a day. On weekends, it's closer to 400 minutes. This was courtesy of the Digital Parenthood Initiative study. Millennials and Gen Z hang out with friends outside school hours 50% less than Gen X did in the early 1990s. This is actually really interesting that I saw some articles in the last year that like teenage pregnancies are at record lows and everyone's celebrating like, yeah, that's great. It's like, it's actually a problem because dead serious. Because no one's having sex because no one's in person. There's actually an optimal amount of teenage pregnancies you want. That means people are actually still attracted to each other and willing to go see other people, go on dates, go to movies, go to restaurants. So like everyone's celebrating like, yeah, there's not teenage pregnancies anymore. And the reason is no one is ever seeing each other ever in person. That's not a good thing. No one hangs out anymore. There's even jokes, like you guys have probably seen this meme. I think I've shared this meme because I think it's funny. When people ask me to go big or go home, they are seriously underestimating my desire to go home. Right? Our kids have absorbed that mentality. The most social time in their life, or for a teenage boy, when your hormones are like crazy, they're just not going on dates. A lot of kids don't have driver's licenses now. They don't want a driver's license. They don't want to travel. They don't want to go out for sports. They want to just sit on their phones all day. And if you don't think this has long-term consequences for society and culture as a whole, you're wrong. Socially underdeveloped childhood, which is what this is. If you're not going on dates, you're not going out for sports teams, you're not involved in extracurriculars or church or even just hanging out with friends, right? That leads to socially stunted adulthood. Everyone knows someone who has a kid who's 27 and hasn't left home, or 34 and hasn't left home, hasn't had a job. They're kind of just drifting throughout their 20s, right? Because they didn't have an actual adolescence, right? What we all experienced maybe when we were 11, 12, 13, they're getting to that when they're like 25, right? It's why for the first time ever, the average age of a male marrying is now over age 30. Our grandparents stormed Omaha Beach when they were 18 and 19. And now we're not even mature enough to be married. I would say if our generation is not mature enough to get married until we're 30, they should not be voting at age 18. Right? The average first-time homebuyer, which has some economic explanations here, but culture, as the whole point of this presentation is that economics and culture are related, right? Is now 39 years old, average age of a first-time homebuyer. Socially underdeveloped childhood leads to socially stunted adulthood. I was explaining this relationship earlier in the presentation as a positive, but it's also true in the negative sense that when something doesn't make sense, culture is probably the explanation. This is also true of bad things. A 5 percentage point increase in time spent alone affects your well-being, happiness, the same way 10% reduction in household income does. This is courtesy of the Philadelphia Fed. So that means that if you're spending 20% more time alone year to year, 20% would have the same effect of losing 40% of your income. Most of us don't realize it, but even if you're an introvert, which I absolutely am an introvert, even if you're an introvert, being in a room like this and at an event like this kind of like gives you life, right? It feels good in a way that you maybe don't know how to quantify, but it's real. You know what I'm saying? It's almost like applying this idea of fuzzy ROI to just how you live your life, right? Just because you can't define something or capture it empirically on a spreadsheet or in a formula doesn't mean it's not real. Men who watch television now spend 7 hours watching TV for every hour they spend hanging out with someone in person. 7-to-1 ratio. Women who own cats spend more time alone with their cats than they do with other women. That's an actual statistic from the same study. Now, most of us, might hear all this and think, yeah, but, social media has been great because social media has connected us with so many other people that we weren't able to connect with in 2002. And so maybe that's why we're not hanging out as much. And that's exactly right. And at the same time, it's exactly wrong. I'm gonna read from an article from Derek Thompson here because I just want to get this word for it. It was so good how he put this. You learn a lot about a company when its back is against the wall. This past summer, we learned something important about Facebook. In an antitrust case with the Federal Trade Commission, Facebook filed a legal brief on August 6 in which it made a startling claim. We cannot be a social media monopoly, they said, because we're not really a social media company. Only a small share of time spent on our social networking platforms is truly social networking. Again, they're admitting this legally in writing in a court of law. More than 80% of time spent on Facebook and more than 90% of time spent on Instagram, keep in mind Facebook and Instagram are Meta, it's the same company, is spent watching videos. Most of that time is spent watching content from creators who the user does not know. So at what point is social media actually just media? $80 to 90% of time on Facebook and Instagram is spent watching videos from creators the user does not personally know. Now, I will read verbatim from the FTC filing. Today, only a fraction of time spent on Meta services, 7% on Instagram, 17% on Facebook, involves consuming content from online friends. A majority of time spent on both apps is watching videos, increasingly short-form videos that are unconnected, which means not from a friend or an account you're actually following, and is recommended by AI-powered algorithms that Meta developed as a direct competitive response to TikTok. This was filed in a legal court of law, which means they're not lying. Social media has evolved from text to photo to video to streams of text, photo, and video, and finally it seems to have reached a kind of settled end state. This is Derek Thompson writing this, in which TikTok and Meta are both trying to become the same thing, a screen showing hours and hours of video made by people we don't know. Social media has turned into television. We think of it as social media, but it is no different at this point than watching TV. Ben Thompson from the, I don't know if you pronounce this, but the Stratechery blog, it's the word tech and strategy, one of my favorite business blogs, has this concept called the 90-9-1 rule for social media. And that's 90% of people on any social media platform consume content. They will never post or create any content. They just consume content that other people create. 9% of people, which gets us from 90 to 99, 9% of people will distribute content that other people create, so they'll share things, or they'll remix content they see from someone else and sort of put their own spin on it, but they're not actually introducing anything new to the ecosystem. Only 1 person out of 100 per user on any social media network actually uploads original content. It's a 99-1 rule. I would assert that completely independent of, a business conversation about what's going to help your marketing or improve the performance of your ads, you will be a happier person the more that you put the social back into social media and the more content you create versus content that you consume. Do it for personal well-being and happiness reasons, and then you'll probably be pleasantly surprised at the business results. Now, the question behind all this is what is causing that? Like, what possibly could be causing this shift, this decline in culture and society? Well, most of us know that the good old days were the 1950s and the 1960s. Again, we haven't had language for it. We maybe haven't seen statistics prior to this presentation this morning that talk about the good old days. Now you maybe have a bit of an idea. My theory, and it's shared by some other people as well, is that a lot of it has to do with inflation and debt. We went off the gold standard in 1971, and that basically meant the government did not have to actually carry gold that would offset liabilities they had. So the Federal Reserve could officially start printing as much money as they wanted for any reason ever in 1971. There was no limit to how much the government could spend starting in 1971. This also coincides with the Great Society programs from Lyndon Johnson, which basically grew the modern welfare state. We did not have a welfare state really prior to the 1960s the way that we have it now. And so that kind of crowds out community. The punchline of a lot of this is that in most towns across America, the number one source of community is a local church. 50% of all volunteering, 50% of what we call social capital or social infrastructure are church related. 50% of those clubs, like all the stats I shared with you, half of that is attributable in one way or another. Whether it's you going on a missions trip or being at a Bible study or working at a soup kitchen, it's related to a church. So when church membership declines or participation in churches decline, it affects society as a whole, even if you are not religious. So when the government started taking a more active role in society, because you can see here, this is just proof of the growing size of government, it's not a surprise when you look at this graph and then you ask an old person, what were the good old days? And they say the 1950s and 60s. It's like, what was true? Or maybe I should ask, what was not true about society in the 1950s and 60s? It's that we expected each other and our communities to solve social problems. We didn't expect politicians to do it for us. As we see politicians solving all problems, most of us have never had this conscious thought. We've never explicitly said this out loud, but it's like, well, I don't need to worry about my neighbor. That's what Social Security is for. That would have been a totally foreign concept in the 1950s or 60s, and a totally foreign concept in the Bible. For those of you who can't read this is one of my favorite memes. It's Jesus preaching, and he says, help your neighbor, from the Sermon on the Mount, and take care of the poor and helpless. And someone says, but Jesus, can't we just give our money to the Romans and let them do it for us? And he says, okay, I'm going to start over from the beginning, let you know where I lost you. This has profound implications for culture, society, and marketing. This is kind of a diagram of what I would just call your sphere of influence, right? Most of you don't need platform for friends and family. Like if you're not getting referrals from friends and family, there's problems with you and your business that platform can't fix. Like seriously, right? You don't need us to get referral from your brother or sister or your kids or your parents, right? Where platform kicks in and most of the value is the friends of friends, right? I said this yesterday. Most of you can probably attribute 80 to 90% of your success in how much you've grown your business, whether you've been with platform for 2 years, you've been with platform for 7 years, you can attribute most of that success to I just find myself getting more referrals from people I sort of know, but not really. like a guy I went to high school with, or a person who technically goes to my church, but I've never talked to her, or a friend from my husband's work that we don't know, but he referred someone to us. Like, you guys know what I'm talking about? You just get more referrals from people that technically have a connection to you, technically, but you weren't getting referrals from those people before. And all of a sudden, enough of those referrals start coming in from that middle part of the sphere of influence that your business doubles or triples. You could argue that Jesus' theology, what he's introducing in the Sermon on the Mount, and frankly, all of the Gospels, is a theology centered around friends of friends. He actually actively tells you, don't worry about people halfway across the earth. Don't even worry much about your friends and family, because they already had that in the law. Like the Jews had the law going back to the Old Testament that was all focused on friends and family. The only new thing Jesus introduced, the only purpose of the New Testament, technically, is this focus on the middle of the sphere of influence. He's like, you got to start caring about the people in your community that are connected to you, but that are not your friends and family. That's what we call the messy middle of the sphere of influence, right? This is also what has gotten destroyed in our culture with this, obsession we have with smartphones and social media not really being social, is that we have no connections anymore, most of us, to the middle of our sphere of influence, because we're actually now more connected than ever to friends and family. How many of you have like a group text with someone in your family? Exactly. How many of you follow, for a fans and followers, this third level, I think of this as sports teams you follow, your favorite musical artists, if you're like a Swiftie, or whatever, your favorite actors, actresses are, politicians, if you're ever on a list of, I signed up for the Bernie Sanders list or the Ron Paul list, you're getting these endless texts from the Democrats or the Republicans, right? Fans and followers are about affinity, but they're not people you really know, right? It's just like these big tribes that you're in, we're more connected than ever to these big tribes. We get endless emails, from politicians that we donated to, or from a concert from a band that we went to 7 years ago, or these large memberships or organizations that we're in, right? We're also more tightly connected than ever to our immediate family and friends, but no one in between. I grabbed lunch with, I won't say his name, but he's a very, very top realtor in the United States, top like 1% of 1%. This person has spoken at platform masterminds before, and I was talking about the presentation I was going to give here, and I just asked him, "Do you have friends?" And he kind of laughed, because we were having this in a conversation about, I was like, I've lived in Naples a long time, and I can honestly say, I don't have friends here. And I asked this question to a lot of my friends who now live across the country, people I grew up knowing. And hey, you've lived in Charlotte for 10 years, or you now have lived in Las Vegas for 6 years. And they'll be like, no, I really don't. We know some parents from my kid's school, or coworkers or whatever, or we have some agents on my team, or it's but I don't really have friends. And that's really common now. Most people don't have friends they hang out with. For a lot of you, again, I'm very aware of this, the reason you stay in platform for 9 years is because of the friends in this room, right? We're losing that as a culture. Have you guys ever also felt that our politics has become super, super toxic in the last 5-10 years? That's what happens when the middle connections in your sphere of influence evaporate. It's the middle connections that moderate our politics, because if you know people in your neighborhood, you actually know your neighbors, which most of us don't, right? Most of us don't actually know our neighbors. You don't know if they're a conservative or a liberal or a Democrat or a Republican. So you're not going to go on some unhinged rant at a community event about how much you hate President Trump is doing this, or how much you love that President Trump is doing this, or something that Biden did or didn't, because you don't want to alienate people in the messy middle if you don't actually know them. So this acts as kind of a glue to society, right? The more people in that middle of the sphere of influence that we actually have connections with, parents at your kid's school, parents on your daughter's volleyball team, parents of your kid's baseball team, right? People in clubs or at your church, the more of those connections we have, the more it forces us to get along with each other, because we don't know necessarily what they believe or don't believe, right? most of us have probably, I have certainly never done this, but most of us have probably said something on Facebook in an argument with someone that we would never say to that person's face. Just kidding, I do that all the time. Right? Like, you've said something where when you read that, you're like, oh, that was pretty mean. Like, that was a little bit over the top, right? In some political argument about abortion or tax rights or war or insert your favorite political topic that gets you fired up, right? You've said something ridiculously mean-spirited that if you were in person with someone at a cafe, you would never say in real life, right? It's because we don't have these connections. The author of the book, Alienated America, which I'll share a couple more stats from here, gives this thought experiment that when you think about something like Social Security, look at the name of what they called it. It's meant to like take our social connections away. Social Security. Imagine if the argument for Social Security is true, imagine that we started just delivering food to everyone over the age of 60 so that they would never have to go out and get food. That would be great. We could call it food security. Like, we're going to deliver your groceries right to your door. But no one ever asks, what are we taking away from people when we do that? Like, what human level of existence do you lose when you try to automate solutions from the top down that remove our social connections? If your food was delivered to your front door by a government program, you would never go to the grocery store. You would never bump into people at the grocery store. You would never go to a neighborhood cafe for breakfast and meet other people and talk to the waiter or waitress and bump into people that you might know. And you might say, oh yeah, but it's so much better if the food is brought right to you. You don't have to worry about it. But you're missing the point, right? If you rob people of those social connections, of old people who go to McDonald's and sit there for 4 hours and order a black coffee and just talk, right? It's not the coffee, right? We all intuitively know this. Like, at some sort of primal gut level, we all get this, but we don't understand how deep the implications actually run for the middle layer there. And if it's not already obvious by now, I'll just say that the entire platform strategy, if you think about it, like everything platform does is about the messy middle. It's about optimizing those social connections that you have in the middle. Some of you are secretly hoping your platform ads going viral can be a substitute for actually participating in your community. I'm going to repeat that once really slow. Some of you are secretly hoping your platform ads going viral can be a substitute for actually participating in your community. This is the real reason some people have wild success with platform and other people have middling success. It's the reason that some people double or triple their business, and some people might still add 20, 30% to their business, 40%, and you're still happy with that, and you stick with platform. Maybe you've been with platform for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, but you haven't like tripled your business yet. It's that a lot of you just, if you're honest with yourself and you look at yourself in the mirror, like, how active are you in the community? How much are you engaged with that middle layer of the sphere of influence? And I'm not talking about a once-a-year client appreciation party where you rent out a movie theater. Relationships are not an annual thing, right? Just like someone who goes to church once a year doesn't really go to church. You know what I'm saying? If you go for Christmas, it's not the same thing as someone who goes 52 times a year. A client appreciation event once a year is not engaging with your sphere. Sometimes I think the best advertising strategy is having the emotional courage to sell what people want, and then you Trojan horse what they need. So promote what it is you think they want so that you can get them in your world, in your sphere, talking about what they actually need. And what they actually need is community. I want to talk through just how the mastermind works here. So I think this year we spent about $160,000. The event center was, the catering and everything was about $60,000. That's why it kind of chaps my ass that they giving us noise complaints. It's like, that's what the money's for. Like, we paid you $60,000. Don't tell me I can't blast Blink-182. $60,000 was spent on this, like, event center and the lunches and the room rentals and everything. Transportation car rentals for our team was about $5,000. The event decor was about $10,000. If you count labor hours into that, it's probably like $100,000. Speaker expenses, like $10,000 plus or minus. AV rental is about 10 grand. Employee travel, so obviously, like, we don't make our employees buy their own airfare for the event. It's about 15 grand. Various other just random stuff is $15,000. The hotels for our team members are about $35,000. It adds up to being a lot of money. It costs, for every person here, it's about $700 to put on this event. I mentioned yesterday, there's no sponsors, there's no revenue from this event, there's no upsell. I'm not ending this presentation with an opportunity to join my mastermind. This event is pure cost, right? Why do we do it? When something doesn't make sense, the explanation is usually culture. We do this event because it creates such a culture that Platform many months has net negative churn. This is something that I speak a lot actually at marketing conferences on now, because I have like marketing organizations that'll bring me in to speak to teach other agency owners how to run better agencies. And no one believes me when I tell them we have net negative churn. In the marketing world, what that means is most months Platform grows even if we don't spend money on ads. Like, we get more referrals every month than we have clients quitting. We have 290 clients right now, I think, and last month we lost 3 people. So that's like a 1% churn rate. The average marketing agency has closer to an 8 to 10% monthly churn rate. So the average marketing agency, if they were our size, having 300 clients, would be losing like 30 clients a month. Last month we lost 3 clients out of nearly 300. That's how we can afford to put on an event like this and not charge you. But I think that's reversing cause and effect. Because we've cultivated that culture in that community, because we invest in events like this, that's why people stay. That's why they stay so long. I think if Max Reimer or if Andrew Madsen's in the room, you guys remember I gave a version of this talk at an agency conference a couple years ago, and people came up to me and were like, "That's not true. That's not true. You don't have net negative churn. There's no way." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I mean, here's our numbers," and they were just like they thought I was lying. That they don't even think it's possible that you could have retention like that people would stay with you that long. Because if the average monthly churn in a marketing agency is 10%, there's 12 months in a year. So 10 times 12 is 120. That means you entirely cycle through. By the time the next year rolls around, you have an entirely new group of clients. Like, no one made it a year, right? What we have here is really, really rare. Some people would use miracle to describe what is easier explained by the word culture. I want to share a story quick about a man named Albert Lasker, and he's considered like the father of modern advertising. And he had an ad agency in the late 1800s, early 1900s in Chicago called Lord & Thomas. Now, Lord & Thomas, if you're an advertising nerd, ignore them. Look at me. Look at me. Over here. Eyes here. Lord & Thomas was like the 1927 Yankees of the advertising world. They really like invented modern advertising. And one of my all-time favorite stories, I don't know how this isn't famous. I'm quite confident no one here has ever heard this story, but I think it's like the coolest story ever, is the California, don't get excited that these are not mimosas, this is just orange juice. The California Orange Growers Association in 1907 called Albert Lasker and said, "Hey, we have a huge problem on our hands. Like, citrus demand has absolutely collapsed. No one's buying oranges anymore. We planted so many trees and have flooded the market. There's a bumper crop that the price of oranges is so low that we're just cutting down trees. Because every orange we sell, we're losing money on. And so it's not profitable for us to actually harvest the fruit and sell these oranges because the price of oranges has gotten so low that it just doesn't make economic sense for us to keep people on our teams, to keep these trees. They were literally chopping down their orange orchards in 1907. So they called Lord and Thomas, and they're explaining the situation to him. He's like, well, why did you plant so many trees in the first place? Why do we have this supply and demand imbalance? And they're like, well, during the gold rush in like 1849, it was discovered then, or it was known then, that these guys were going out and like panning for gold, and a lot of them were getting scurvy. And you can cure scurvy practically overnight with vitamin C and citrus. And so that's why like California popped up as this like orange destination, because they needed citrus to help that way back when in the 1840s and 1850s. And it was what kind of carried that reputation into the 20th century. But they had planted so many trees and flooded the market with oranges that orange prices have collapsed, and they're all about to go out of business. So California Orange Growers Association calls Albert Lasker and says, help us. Now, at this time, people actually respected marketing companies. In the 20th century, how you would think about your relationship with an advertising agency is that they were the ultimate business problem solvers, the way that today we think about consulting companies like Deloitte or Bain or Boston Consulting Group or McKinsey. Like they're the ultimate badass business problem solvers they would only hire MBAs from Harvard or Stanford, right? The way that, again, we look at consulting companies. That's what advertising agencies were back then. They would only hire the best and brightest out of the best schools. Sometimes the solution was an ad campaign, but sometimes it wasn't. If people aren't buying oranges, there's probably no amount of ads you can see that's just going to bring back an entire industry, right? So Albert Lasker comes up with this idea. If I can't quantitatively shift consumer taste or demand, what if I can do it qualitatively? In other words, what if I think culturally about this problem instead of empirically? And so in his mind, in a notebook, brainstorming advertising ideas, he invents the idea of orange juice. Orange juice did not exist as a concept before Albert Lasker in this advertising campaign in 1907. And the reason this is genius and why I think like business and marketing and culture are just so related. And if you think you've studied marketing, but you haven't studied culture, you don't know anything about marketing. He realizes that in an average glass of orange juice, there's 4 oranges. So I can 4x the average consumption by getting people to drink a glass of orange juice rather than eat an orange. How many of you wake up every day and you're like, it's time to eat my orange? How many of you wake up every day and you think it's time to eat my 4 oranges? No one does that, but you wouldn't even think twice about drinking a glass of orange juice in the morning. We have Albert Lasker to thank for that. This campaign worked so well, it rescued the industry, that you probably never heard of the California Orange Growers Association, but you might know the brand name that Albert Lasker, shortly after this campaign, changed their brand name into Sunkist, after he literally invented orange juice as a marketing campaign. So if we can raise a toast to the history of orange juice and PlatFam community. Cheers. I think this decline in culture, what some people might call loneliness, is actually the biggest opportunity for realtors since like the internet itself. Because a challenge or a difficulty is just a different way of saying an opportunity, right? You're never going to beat Zillow at SEO, right? But if you can become a stronger lighthouse in your community, that you give people a sense of hope, you give people a sense of connection, no matter what happens with AI, right? If your competitive advantage is about local connections in the community, who cares about AI? I am not worried about, I work in marketing, right? It's where AI is having the most immediate impact. I don't lose sleep over AI because community is the ultimate moat around the castle. Having actual connections with people who like you and trust you, AI doesn't matter for that. All AI does is it automates the outer rims of the sphere of influence. It does not affect things close to you. I think this is the biggest opportunity for realtors in any of your careers, that America's culture is changing and not for the better, and we can be a solution. Like, we can craft ideas and solutions that get people together in person in your communities. Again, not through an annual client appreciation event where you rent a movie theater and no one talks to each other for 2 hours, right? But actual in-person hanging out. Sometimes it's informal. You might start a Bible study at your house. That has nothing to do with business, right? Like, you're not doing it for business. You might start a book club about some random book. Doesn't have to be the Bible, right? What is a Bible study if not a book club about a particular book, right? Start doing things in real life with other people and watch your business grow. I want to share a couple more interesting stats from the book Alienated America. I've recommended this book to so many people. I think Andrew Madsen, Andrew Chermak, Max would probably agree. It's like maybe the most interesting book they've read in the last 5-10 years. It really is like this book, Alienated America. I would love to get Tim Carney, the author, to speak at a mastermind, maybe next year. It gets to this idea of like, when a community dies or a culture dies, what is actually dying, right? Because Silicon Valley has businesses go out of business all the time, and yet they have a thriving economy. So something going out of business doesn't mean your community died. And they have like quantifiable proof in this book that if churches close in your community, if bowling leagues close, if these other what they call social infrastructure starts eroding, that actually has far more negative consequences for a community than a business closing. As crazy as that sounds. On average, Brad Wilcox writes, with the data to back it up, Americans who regularly attend services at a church, synagogue, temple, or mosque are less likely to cheat on their partners, less likely to abuse them, more likely to enjoy happier marriages, less likely to have been divorced. There's enough evidence to suspect a real causal relationship here. The General Social Survey, which is one of the broadest and most in-depth sociological surveys of American culture, has data on how much churchgoers behaved compared with non-churchgoers. Wilcox studied these numbers and also controlled for income, race, education, age, gender, and geographic region. So controlling for all possible variables that might throw this off. The researchers wanted to make sure they weren't finding more family-friendly behaviors among churchgoers just because churchgoers might be more educated or wealthier, right? So they controlled for every possible variable. With these controls in place, families that attend church services weekly were more likely than those who seldom or never attend to eat dinner together daily, 58% to 41%, do household chores together weekly, 71% to 56%, go to movies, sporting events, or local parks at least once a month, 56% to 43%. Church-going kids, Robert Putnam wrote in his book, Our Kids, have better relations with their parents and other adults, have more friendships with high-performing peers, are more involved in sports and other extracurricular activities, are less prone to substance abuse, drugs, alcohol, and smoking, risky behavior, and delinquency. On a more fundamental level, research suggests that religious people, all else being equal, are happier than less religious people. About half of people who attend church more than once a week say they are very happy. The number of people who don't attend church is about 25%. So you are twice as likely to say you're very happy if you attend church weekly, controlling for every possible socioeconomic variable. If you go to church weekly, you are 19 points more likely to say the American dream still holds true. And that's, again, factoring for every possible variable. A study of 18,000 baby boomers found that those who attended church frequently were 40% less likely to die in that 10-year stretch. The study was from 2004 to 2014. 40% less likely to die in that 10-year stretch than those who didn't attend. So multiple studies have gotten at this idea that there's something about connection that actually affects the immune system. Remember I mentioned like the smoking 15 cigarettes a day has the same effect on you as being unconnected to other people. The question here, very, very quickly becomes, what's the causal mechanism here? Like, what's actually causing this? Because if you're listening to this and you're agnostic or an atheist, you're probably really annoyed at this point by the presentation. You're like, well, I'm not going to go to church. I don't care what Tim says. I'm not going to start going to church. I have good news for you. The effect holds true whether or not you attend a Christian church, a Muslim mosque, a Jewish synagogue, or insert whatever religion, because none of those effects, none of those statistics I just shared with you have any statistical impact whatsoever unless you go to church once a week. That was the kind of thesis of this book, is that what you believe in terms of like your theology is actually irrelevant. So people who say they're a Christian and, let's say, watch church services in their living room on TV because their church streams it on YouTube or whatever, they will receive none of those positive benefits of watching church on Sunday mornings on their TV. No statistical impact whatsoever on any of those behaviors. Going to church, or in other words, being connected to other people in your local community, is what makes the difference. Being connected to other people in your community. It just turns out that church is a wonderful proxy for all of that. So my wife and I haven't been to church in literally like 10 years. And I started reading this book, and now that we have Rose, and she just turned 3 years old, I'm like reading these stats, and I'm like, well, I don't want to raise Rose without the childhood that we had growing up going to church, because you look at these stats, it's pretty undeniable. You're going to have better outcomes as a parent, a sibling, you'll have a tighter family relationship if you go to church. I'm like, we'll bring her to church, and whatever theological disagreements I have from the stage, I'll just sit there because I'm doing it for Rose, right? And I told myself that for the last 3 years, but we never really started going because I'd rather sleep in on Sundays. And finally, a couple weeks ago, we were at Target one day, and we just saw it was like, I don't know, 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning, something like that. And we saw like hundreds of people descended on this Target in North Naples, like an involuntary flash mob. And they were all wearing matching t-shirts that said, "I love my church." And the website was something napleschurch.com. And we're just like doing our shopping or whatever. I'm like looking around like, are we like not supposed to be here? Cause I mean, it was like so, we had to have been like the only people in this whole Target that were like not wearing matching shirts. So we're kind of like, let's get out of here. And everyone's buying toys, and you see out front, like everyone's going there and buying toys and dumping the toys in this toy drive thing. But when everyone is wearing the same shirt and you're the only one not wearing the same shirt, A, you feel really uncool. And B, you're kind of like, what is this all about? Like, why are all these people doing this? So I'm kind of like grabbing my phone. I'm like trying to read the back of people's shirt, but in a really non-obvious way because I don't want them to know I'm curious. So I'm kind of shopping. I'm like trying to grab, and eventually we're checking out, and there's a person standing in front of us buying all these toys. And so I pull out my phone and I type in like the address. I'm like, oh, okay, it's this church here. And then I go find what they're doing. And they're doing a toy drive, and they organize this thing where the whole church shows up at this church in Naples on this particular Sunday. It's all intentional, designed, obviously. And I'm like, man, what a genius marketing strategy, right? Like, it's brilliant, right? The whole point of a lighthouse, I've talked about this before, is that a lighthouse doesn't have to advertise. Because what a lighthouse does is it's advertising, right? A lighthouse doesn't have to advertise because what it does is its best advertising. Like, that's marketing, right? That's what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 5:16. We played the song Shine a couple times. For those of you who are familiar with Matthew 5:16, it's that like do good deeds in public in front of other people, and they'll want to be more like you, and you'll attract them to the cause, right? That's what being a lighthouse is all about. So we went to church recently. And lest I made you feel too uncomfortable if you're an atheist, I do have one more video to share with you.
Some people think God created the universe. Some people think nothing created the universe, which is the funniest guess. And the nothing people make fun of the God people. They say God doesn't exist. I'm like, okay, maybe. But you know what definitely doesn't exist? Nothing. That's the defining characteristic of nothing, is that it doesn't exist. So what are we talking about? Either you think it's God, something you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and science can't prove, or you think it's nothing, something you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and science can't prove. But I think we can all agree, if your nothing sometimes spontaneously erupts into everything, that's a pretty goddamn magical fucking nothing, you guys. And ask the nothing people, what happens when you die? They'll tell you, nothing. You go into nothing. I'm like, you mean you merge back with your creator?
So one thing I didn't point out on the graph before was that if the good old days were the 1950s and 60s, and all of this social decline has occurred since the 1950s and 60s, what has also declined since the 1950s and 60s? The peak of church attendance in America was the 1950s. The peak of all social clubs and associations were the 1960s. That's when most people, like, the dad might not get home from work on a given night until 7 or 8 p.m. because they'd go from work to all these various clubs and boards they were serving on and church activities or Knights of Columbus or volunteering for this thing or that or a bowling league, right? They didn't need 4,000 square foot homes because their houses were the way we would think about hotels. Like, well, I only sleep there. I don't need a huge house. I only sleep there, right? When church attendance declined, the literal, like, social fabric, like the middle of that sphere of influence declined with it. But most of us don't consider those to be the same thing because we think of church as in this like religious category, when actually that's what makes America different from Europe, is we have such a strong connection in our communities that Europe does not have, that when people stop going to church, we lost the community, but none of us think about it that way. So a couple ideas. Many of you have had these ideas before, but I want to be really explicit about it. Start a book club. Start a small business mastermind in your community. Like a chamber of commerce that doesn't suck, right? Get together and read a business book, Atomic Habits by James Clear. Insert whatever book you think would be interesting. Get a book club together with some entrepreneurs. Get 5, 10 people. There's no agenda. It can be weeknights, order, pizza. It can be breakfast somewhere. And you just read a chapter a week and talk about it. It's for social reasons, right? How does your mindset change around doing this stuff if you start with the premise that I'm doing this for social reasons? Okay? I'm not doing it for business. I'm not doing it because it's part of a super ninja stealth client attraction, client appreciation strategy. I'm doing this to make friends. Do that and all the business stuff takes care of itself. $100 tip club. Get a bunch of people once a quarter to go out to eat, and you all agree ahead of time, we're going to tip $100. If you get 10 people, that's going to be, $1,000 tip to some server that has no idea that it's coming. You're not doing it for business. You're doing it because it's fun, and you'll meet cool people who would want to be a part of that, right? Lighthouse strategy. Lighthouses don't have to advertise because what they do is its own advertising. This one I'll offend some people with, but I think it's a genius idea. Tithe or give with your retargeting ads to promote your church. Most churches tithe on your tithe, which means they give about 10% of their budget to outreach. 90% gets consumed by staff salaries, the grounds, just running the church, So if you want to have your dollars that you're giving make more of an impact, like assuming that you go to a church that you're passionate about, that you want to promote, let's say that you made $120,000 last year. I'll use round numbers. $120,000 is $10,000 a month. So if you were a tithing person, you have $1,000 tithe every month. What if once a month you just spent $1,000 on a video ad or a photo ad promoting your church and why you want to invite people to go? And you just run that as an ad in your community in lieu of giving that same money to the church. That would probably do more good for that church than a random $1,000 that you could give them, because you have a professional marketing agency managing that campaign for you, right? I've told this to many people. Just if you're the type of person who takes sermon notes after some random Sunday and just take a picture of your notes, type a paragraph about what you liked about that sermon, and spend $1,000 supporting the church. Be like, hey, if you don't have a church in this community, come join me next Sunday at such and such church. Tithe whatever your tithe is into your retargeting ads budget and just add it on to whatever you're doing. Like, if you don't think that that would grow your business and grow your church far more effectively than if you gave that same $1,000 to your church, you're out of your mind. Now, most of us feel uncomfortable about that because we think, oh, well, if I benefit from that, then that's not holy. I'm not supposed to benefit from gifts. Have you read Matthew 5:16? It literally says, do good deeds in as public of a way as possible to attract people to the cause. Right? If you're passionate about your church or some other organization, it could be the same thing for another organization. If you're like a dues-paying member of the local fraternity of Satan worshipers, then do videos for that. Right? Like, take whatever church or organization or club that you're passionate about and make videos promoting that with your budget, and the business stuff takes care of itself. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like, stop compartmentalizing your spiritual life and your actual life into separate categories. It's all one. There's no concept of spiritual life in the Bible. If you would have asked Jesus, how's your spiritual life going? He would have been like, what? It's all one, right? It's all connected. And so stop caring about what's going on in national politics, what's going on for your favorite pro sports teams, what's going on halfway across the world. If there's something we can learn from the Gospels, from the Good Samaritan, from like what Jesus changed from the Old Testament to the New Testament, it's that county is more important than country. That's where the real action's at, and it's a lot more fun to have that mindset too. Thank you, guys.